Okay. Thank you very much, and good morning. I only got part of what you explained, but I think I know more or less the subject. So thank you very much for welcoming me here this morning. I'm really glad to have a mixed audience. I understand some architects, developers, products, people, companies. So thank you very much for being here. I will not give you a course on cradle to cradle in details. I'll do that a bit later, maybe, and I'm happy to answer all the questions. I would like, first of all, to explain that what we call circular economy, which is now developed and propagated by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, originates from cradle to cradle. Cradle to cradle also had other fathers before, but basically came out at the end of the 90s or the early 2000s through Michael Braungart and William McDonough. Michael Braungart being a German chemist and William McDonough being American architect and town planner. Cradle to cradle is what brought me in this field, because as an architect working for 30 years in sustainable buildings, I was more and more inclined to try to really find a scientific way to look at how to create positive impact rather than just trying to be less bad. I've done that without calling it cradle to cradle or anything else before, even during my studies in 1984, where I looked at how to create building with local materials, local skills, of course local labor, without using fossil fuels and without toxicity in the building, and try to be somehow zero energy. The first project I did, and I'm not going to show that because I was doing my studies, was a project in Morocco where it was quite easy. It was quite simple to copy the Arab palace with natural ventilation, using water, using shadow, and using the thermal inertia of the heavy materials they could find on the spot. And working on that, more and more I was trying to create what we call, sorry it's in French here, eco-effectiveness. The difference between eco-efficiency and eco-effectiveness is eco-efficiency is what we've been trying to do since Rio 92, and it doesn't work. Or it doesn't work fast enough or well enough, which is to try to reduce, to avoid, to minimize, or to prevent. You cannot build a business on that by only being, protecting yourself from doing bad things. You have to have a positive attitude, which is basically to define what you want, to increase or improve, to innovate and to optimize. Ellen MacArthur Foundation, based on the cradle-to-cradle principles, created this diagram, which shows clearly that one has to separate the biological cycle, basically everything that could go back to humus or go back to nature safely, and the technological cycle, which is trying to use every resources, every material endlessly. Recycling is in fact downcycling. Recycling, even if you recycle something 10 times but you end up putting it in the ground or burning it, is still downcycling. It means that at each cycle of use, if you take a shoe and you make something else with it, it's okay, but you always need to think, and what's next? If you recycle something once or twice, you only postpone the time of you get rid of the resource. Upcycling is to create value at each cycle. It's actually to clean materials. Just to give you an example quickly, we've been working with the steel industry, and for a long time the steel industry decided that there was a lot of impurities in steel, but so be it, let's sell it cheap, and that's it. The impurities in steel were gold, silver, copper, and other things, which are impurities that are worth a lot of money. And in fact, a lot of rare metals were actually lost through the steel industry, until the steel industry understood that by separating it would make value, and it would pay for the fact of creating better steel and stronger steels. This is in Roubaix, near Lille, in North Pas-de-Calais in France. And everybody wanted to knock that building down, and it is the symbol of the largest industry, which was the fabric industry in northern France. And in fact, everybody was shocked by the fact that somebody would destroy where their father and grandfather worked and all that. So we found a solution. I'll explain that later. This is a project that William McDonough did in the United States. This is the site he inherited. I'll show later on what he did with it. He was asked to resolve the stormwater problem that there was there, basically when there was a lot of rain. This is a project we're working on in Brussels, which is called the slaughterhouse abattoir, which is the belly of Brussels. This is where a lot of the food is produced and sold, including meat, and we'll show how we almost replace meat with something else at the same time as keeping the meat industry clean. Project in Paris, how to renovate, and of course you understood that because of the build-up, I emphasize here on renovation, but that also includes public spaces. We're working with the city of Paris on a cradle-to-cradle circular economy project over 1.5 kilometers long to create a demonstration that will be spread across all the districts around. This is near the Gare du Nord. The Berlaymont building was my baby for a few years. I was explaining earlier on. As an architect, I was responsible for the refurbishment, which is let's say about 280 million euro expected. Then it ended up more expensive than that, but not because of the architect, I can swear. Which became an exemplary building, starting from what we call the Berlaymonster. The name is Berlaymont, EU headquarters, and it was called the Berlaymonster. It was quite a challenge to turn it into something where the European Commission would be happy to go back in. So we had to go further. That was designed that in '96, where I realized that no one in the building industry knew, in general, apart from a very few exceptions, what was there in the material they were selling, what was there in their products. And when you ask questions about the size of fibers in insulation products, when we're talking about toxicity, about off-gassing, everybody said, well, I don't know because I don't know what my supplier, the supplier was saying that his supplier, they didn't know what was in there, they didn't know what kind of paint, they didn't know what kind of chemicals were in the products. And that's where I joined, in fact, Michael Brondgart, he's a German and famous German chemist, because he gave me scientific answers to these things. And funny enough, when I was working on this project, I was asked, well, I was actually chased by 4 huge lawyer firms from UK, representing all the chemistry industry and Solvay and others, because I said publicly at the press conference that we would get rid of as many toxic products as we could in the building, but also we would make sure that we don't put toxic products back in the refurbishment, in the renovation. And I mentioned PVC, because PVC for me is cancerogenous, and it still is, and I can tell you whoever challenges me on that, I have a file like this explaining it. And that file was actually produced by Michael Brondgart when he was working for Greenpeace in Germany. And so basically it's not that I won the case, it's that as soon as I sent this file to the 4 lawyer firms, I never heard of them anymore. So that's where I understood that as architects and as construction companies or consultants or engineers or developers, we have a power. We have a power to ask the industry to produce the right products. And I think this is essential. I'm not saying we have solutions for everything. Some of the products, if I take the example of PVC, there are some PVC that are not that bad, but you could also say there are some asbestos that are not that bad, okay? So we have to be very, very careful how it is used, and until we find a way of recycling or upcycling PVC, because PVC, if I give that example, is a fantastic petrol product to start with, which in fact has problems, but you could use it outside, but the main problem is we cannot today really destroy it safely.